Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
You ready to start?
Yes.
Okay. O Lord and Master of my life, do not give me the spirit of sloth, meddling, lust of power, and idle talk, but give rather the spirit of chastity, humility, patience, and love to thy servant. Yea, O Lord and King, grant me to see mine own sins, and not to judge my brother, for thou art blessed unto age of ages. Amen. Isn't that a beautiful prayer? You didn't say it, you know. How good is our God? All right, so with the help of God, let's start. Just a couple of comments to quickly bring you up to speed on where the material where we're at, and then we'll break and take your reflections, a little discussion, then we'll take, so I'm breaking up in two halves. And the second half will have a lot of interesting social ramifications, which I hope we can plumb out. I really want to give attention to the second half of this third chapter. The first half should be pretty straightforward, laying the gospel, love as a foundation. But this humanitarian love, this fake love, we're going to have to look at that. Because that's all around us, and we're swimming in a sea of those false notions. We want to flesh those out. So quick review. The first time we met, we talked about self-assertive pride and the history of self-assertive pride from the point of view of ancient history down through the New Testament era. And this is all the church, how this self-assertive pride has manifested itself in church history all the way down to the present. Then we talk in chapter 2 using little Tatiana's body as a shape to simulate the human being. That's why the legs are so short. And that's what you get when you take a baby and it's like. Anyway, we're made up of body, soul, and spirit. That's what those different colors symbolize. Remember, he put that in there because we cannot understand what he's presenting in chapter 3 and following if we don't understand the dynamic of our makeup and how God works on us. If we don't understand that, then we're liable to come to chapter 3, look at the indictment on fake Christian love, and try to moralize it and fix it by sheer behavioral change. It's like, let's fix it. Let's all just resolve, turn over a new leaf, and just fix it. Okay, enough of the sin, just stop it. You know, that comedian, Bob Newhart, you know, the little sketch. Stop, just stop it. You know.
How would you say?
Anyway, if you haven't seen it, it's a YouTube thing. You can look at it.
Great.
So he put in that psychology, pneumatology, you know, human being, like what we're made up as and how it works. I would suggest that if that were expanded, he would probably add something about the nature of the church as a community of spiritual people. That would be a nice add-on for that. Perhaps we can come back to that later because of the way the church works as a charismatic society, not just a mere organization, but a charismatic society of people who are born from above and share in that spiritual legacy, right? That's the legacy of the church, and that affects each of us as persons. So we're not individuals, we're persons, which means we relate to one another. So I do want to come back to that at some further point. So now, tonight, we're at chapter 3. And frankly, as I've been reading through this and giving myself time to, the way I process a book is I basically take a pad and I write while I'm reading. And I capture material, and then I look at my material and I absorb it. I say, like, what is he saying here? What is the meaning of these things? So for those of you that didn't get a chance to read chapter 3 carefully, or you read it over lunch, or you read it while you're driving. No, you really didn't. I know you didn't do that. But you read it maybe under duress, or you thought, oh, last night you thought tomorrow they're going to have this study and I haven't read it. I know how many of you read it last night, or some of it, and then you thought, well, at least I'll have something under my belt. Okay, so it might not be pre-digested. So that's fine. We'll work with what, you're not getting a credit for this course. Just the joy of learning and the spiritual benefit of taking things to heart. So this chapter is entitled Gospel Love and Human Altruism. So what I did is, I know what altruism is in the popular sense, but I thought, I'll just look the darn word up, because when in doubt, check out the dictionary. And the dictionary definition goes exactly opposite of what Archbishop Averki avers that altruism is. Now, I think the Archbishop is far more prophetic in his expose of human altruism, much more so than the dictionary definition, which runs along the lines of altruism is the commitment to an ethic of selfless charity to other people. Yes, it uses the word selfless. Selfless charity to others as a way of life. Wonderful definition. But when you look into the altruistic examples, every single one of them is ego-driven. So you wonder, like, wait, selfless or selfish? Or some ego something involved there. He brings it out in the chapter about how there can be no true love because all true love is crucified love. That means it has to undergo a death and is willing to die for the sake of the other. No greater love hath a man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. I understand that Putin quoted that scripture verse earlier today or yesterday. But he used the word dushu in Russian, which means soul as well as life. And there was a big flurry about what he meant by that. I could have calmed them all down and said, like, just settle down. It's just dushu. It just means soul or life. That's all it means. So, anyway. So, what is he talking about in terms of love? So, quick, just a few things to kind of bring this up fully in front of us, and then we'll discuss it. So, on page 32, he says, where there is no love, there is no Christianity. All right? So, right away, we have right up front a very bold assertion. Where there is no love, there is no Christianity. That is to say, Christianity is not a religious system. It is an exposition, indeed, of a way of life that's marked chiefly by love. He cites the commandments that Jesus Christ himself gave. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength, and thy neighbor as thyself. Remember now that Archbishop Averki, in the Russian tradition, he calls that the short gospel. I thought that was an interesting expression. I didn't know that before. And then he, on page 33, takes us through an expose of how creation itself took place as an expression of divine love. This is very, very beautiful, and I think it requires meditation. I think we should stop and meditate on that. Now, it's not easy, because when God created, many things came into being. Let's stop and meditate on this before we go much farther. What came into being when God created? Even when I use the word when, it's a problem, posing the question. But we're human beings, we have no other way to do it. All right?
The heavens and the earth.
Okay, the heavens and the earth.
All
Okay.
the animals.
All the animals,
Plants.
the sun,
Time, sun, moon, time.
Oh, now see, the pious subdeacon has already got the grace of higher things going on here.
I have subdeacon's wife.
Well, behind every pious subdeacon is a pious Mrs. Subdeacon, a subdiaconess. So time came into being. So before God created, was there a before? Now that requires meditation. So there was no before time created, that God created time.
For God there was.
No, there wasn't.
Just is.
Outside of time.
He who is, the opening words of the Saint Basil and Ephra, we say in the liturgy of Saint Basil, the opening words are, in Greek, on, he who is. It's interesting, he's called the one who is, from the Exodus, by the way, big memory verse for all of you who like to memorize Bible verses. Exodus 3:14. You know of John 3:16. Well, Exodus 3:14. I am.
That I am.
Tell Pharaoh, I am is sending you to me. So we don't say he who was, we say he who is. Or you could put it in capital letters. I am. Right? He's the only truly existing one. That means when he created as an act of love. When I say when, I'm speaking in human terms. Because before there was creation, there was no before. There was no after. From God's point of view, creation is expression of his love. If someone says, well, why didn't he create before he did it? Then our answer is very simple. He did. Well, how come he waited so long to create?
He didn't.
He didn't. See, this is the part that requires meditation. Many of the church fathers, Augustine of Hippo, who I know is writing very well, Maximus the Confessor of Constantinople, many of them reflected long, deep, prayerfully, and hard on this question of creation. The Greeks and the pagans all deny there was any creation. They just say everything that's here has always been here. It just goes through cycles of existence, right? Cycles. Ever, like the Hindu cycles of destruction and immersion, and destruction and immersion. The Neoplatonic cycle of emanation and then conversion, emanations and conversions. All of this is pagan nonsense. Only there was unique in all of history, only was there one doctrine that God who is, the one who is, actually created from nothing everything that exists, including time. Scientists approach it from a speculative point of view when they make such statements having to do with cosmogony. That's the fancy word that has to do with the doctrine of the foundation of everything that exists. When they talk about the Big Bang, right? The singularity, and all of that. Well, it's fascinating. You could even say these people have approximated a revealed truth regarding created, although they don't. They say that always existed, right? And that it'll go back to that after a while, because everything will expand so far and then slowly come back and do it again. That's what you get when you have no revelation. But the Archbishop says that God created, there is now an object of God's love. So the Creator called into being everything that exists, that didn't used to be there, that is now other than him. That also is a giant philosophical problem. How can you posit that anything that exists from nothing can be other than the Creator itself? And yet, it's true. There's the created, which is an object, and God, who's a subject. And they're not the same. We say God is everywhere present and filleth all things, but that doesn't mean that all things are God. He says this is a sign of love. So creation happened because God is love. Creation continues in the form of providence. Now he doesn't state it like that. I'm expanding what he said there just a little bit so you understand what his meaning is. Creation is not a static event. It's constantly happening. Look at spring. I mean, every time I open my door and look out my slider door in the backyard, I go out every morning, there's new things that have blossomed that weren't there. You know, I have a thing growing out of the ground. It's like this thing is every day it's sticking up further and further. It didn't used to be there. I don't know what's going to happen. What's going to happen? Is it going to turn into a tree? Is it going to blossom? It's like a surprise. That wasn't there before. Where is that coming from? It's coming from nothing. And God is taking up the elements there, and in his great and loving mercy, showing some beauty. Right? We think it's a nuisance. We're always sweeping up stuff. It's like, oh, this dreadful tree is dropping all this crap on my lawn. No, you should look at it from another point of view. Look at God is creating all of this beautiful flower stuff.
And maybe they wouldn't turn those awful leaf blowers on that take so much practice.
Don't even get me started.
Snake against the law, those things.
That's a button right there.
They're horrible.
Now you're not good for me.
Exactly. Get him started.
You and me. This is what we call providence, which is also a sign of God's love. We believers, we recognize that there's providence, and we rejoice. We're not left alone in the universe, a cold, soulless, banal existence that has no meaning. Rational creatures who are created by God are invited by God because of their free will to participate in this exchange of love. Irrational creatures have no choice in the matter. They have no choice. They have no will. They're irrational. The animals, the plants, they simply exist. But rational creatures like men and angels, we come into being and then we are invited to participate. And it isn't clear yet whether we will choose to do so or not. What an incredible risk of love that is. And even though there's a fall, God still loves. It was God's love which brought about the passion of Christ. Remember, he touched on that? And it is the love of God which inspires the martyrs and the ascetics in their endeavors. They love God, and they expended their life's blood and their sweat and their effort in order to show their response to God's love. They said, "For the love of God, I will not bow to the idol. For the love of God, I will not deny the name of Christ. And for the love of God, I will deny my own comforts for the gospel's sake." We have them as a beautiful testimony. Look at the holy man Nectarius who's depicted for us in this movie. They did a fantastic job. If you know his life and read his Vita, you will understand totally how awful that man suffered, how he was slandered. They did an excellent job of showing that. All of family life is a structure of love. He doesn't cite it, but I will, because he talks about, he mentions that family life itself couldn't exist without love. And this is how God organized human life, which is why the current political climate, which is anti-family, is so toxic. St. Paul cites it like this, Ephesians chapter 3, verse 13, "Wherefore I desire that ye faint not at my tribulations for you, which is your glory. For this cause I bow my knees unto the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, of whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named." Now that's not so clear in the King James Version, but if I were translating it literally, I would say, I bow my knees unto the Father, of whom the whole fatherhood in heaven and earth gets its name. So fatherhood is a sign of love. It's a gift of love. And the devil hates it, so he vilifies it. He turns it into a monster. Right? You mentioned patriarch or patriarchy. In today's society, they think you're cursing. But it's the very mark of God's love at the most critical element of human society, namely the family. It's the father who loves the wife and protects and nourishes and admonishes and instructs the children. That is the very heart of the social foundation of human existence. That's gospel love manifest in human society in its microcosmic form. Then expanding out from that, without love, no number of laws can be sufficient to fortify and undergird human society, right? So you have families together forming a tribe or a community, an area, and that larger group of people, a nation of peoples sharing a common life, right? And then you have in different places of the world, as St. Paul says in the preaching to the Greeks in Athens, he said, God has allowed all the nations of the earth, each in their own way, to grope and find their way towards him. Because they all differ, right? The peoples of the earth differ in many, like by language, by custom, but there's certain universals, and fatherhood is fundamental to that universal. Okay? Then he cites, I'm almost done with this opening section and we can discuss it. The lawyer who asked Christ about the law, and that's when we get that beautiful, this is Matthew 22, Gospel according to Matthew 22, verse 35. Oh, I have to read 34 for the context, because you have to imagine who's present. When the Pharisees had heard that Jesus had put the Sadducees to silence, they were gathered together. Yay, the Sadducees have been bested. Get rid of them, now we move in for the kill, right? Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked Jesus a question, tempting, and saying, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said to them, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, or with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. There's the teacher speaking in the most concise form. We mentioned that a little earlier, right? While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them. He knew them. So he asked them, What think ye of Christ? Whose son is he? They said to him, The son of David. And he saith to them, Well then how doth David in spirit call him Lord, saying, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. If David call him Lord, how then is he his son? And no man was able to answer him a word, neither durst any man from that day forth ask him any more questions. Any Bible uses the word durst. That's my Bible. So, Jesus gave the great commandment and then closely as Archbishop of Berkeley taught us in this part of the book. I never thought about this till I saw it written there. I never thought of it. But it's beautiful how Jesus knew who was there, the Pharisees, and so he thought, here's my chance to tell these religious experts how it really works. Love combined with a confession of faith. If you take one away from the other, you drain the other of its power. A confession of faith without love is empty words. And love without a confession of faith is vapid and superficial and not authentic. It's inauthentic. And that's going to take us to the next part of his discussion on page 34 when he says, there is an integral union of love and faith, a connection between the commandment to love God and neighbor with the confession of faith that Jesus is the Christ, son of David, which means to say he's the Christ. That's why John can say, no man, any man who confesses Jesus Christ as God is born from above. And he that loves is born of God, and all the rest of it from the first epistle of St. John. And it is also why in the liturgy that the deacon says, let us all love one another that we may confess. Curious, this command, agapisomen, let us love. Alleles, let us love one another, that we may confess. And then we do, in fact, make the good confession together. All of us with one voice. I believe in one God. And it's at that point that the deacon said, let us love one another, meaning if there's any break in the community, if there's any sundering of love, any failure of charity, let it be fixed now before we approach the holy things and partake of them. In the early church, that was a big moment. Nowadays, all the wise people say you should be smart enough and sensitive enough that before you come to church, to examine yourself to make sure you're at peace with your neighbor. Otherwise, you should not approach the holy things. Stay away from communion if you receive it like Judas, and betray love. This is so important. It's embedded right into the fabric of our liturgical life. Otherwise, what kind of a Christianity have we got anyway? Are you just doing it just to show that, no, I'm Orthodox? We'll find out soon what fake love under one of its guises is. So I'm not going to give away that part right yet. So to sum up, Averki says, without faith in Jesus Christ, there cannot be true love for God or neighbor. Let me read it again. Without faith in Jesus Christ, who is the true God, there cannot be true love for God or neighbor. Top of page 35. This is why this is so, is we are inspired and God's grace sanctifies and illumines us. Otherwise, we are incapable of pure, selfless, or unselfish love. Our love is poisoned. So that's the first half of the chapter. That's where he sets out gospel love. Now let's discuss that before we go on to the fake analysis of all the fake ones. Right? If you examine a dollar bill that you know is real, then when the people that are supposed to tell money, they study the real thing very closely so that when they see a fake, they know it right away. What do you think? I think
its description of how we all think we love God and we love each other is true and hard to feel. Because I do, at some level, think I love God, I think I love people around me. And he says, yeah, no. No, it's tainted with all that self-will, pride. It's sort of back, you mentioned earlier, the first week, I think, he who knows himself is greater than he who takes a city.
Yeah.
How do you plumb those depths and know yourself?
So what does love look like? This gospel love, when he says, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. What is he telling us to do here? Yes.
I think we got a good picture for those who went and saw Stephen's Carlos and about last night. Because he was so selfless. When the old man got sick, he took over his job and scrubbed his toilets at night so nobody would know who did. And when he found a beggar that had no shoes, he sat beside him, talked to him, and then he took off his shoes and gave it to him. He was always doing little things to help those around him and tried to do them all in secret.
Why do you think he did that? Did you find yourself wondering that when you saw it?
He was selfless. He always was putting the other person around him first. And when the boys in school were fighting, he took it on himself to fast. He took the punishment.
I will have to punish myself.
Instead of giving it to them, he took it on himself. So it was like totally backwards from how we think it should be. And that's what was angering everybody around him. You're not doing it right. You know, that's not how you don't punish yourself. You should be punishing them. You're the headmaster. So he chose to be selfless all the time.
I find myself on the one about him sitting next to the beggar, taking off his shoes. St. John of San Francisco. He was in Paris for a little bit. And at the Sorbonne, which is one of the high institutions of France, at the School of Theology, the Roman Catholic theological students, they were told by the professor, if you want to see a saint, go see the L'Homme Sans Pied, the man without shoes. He walks around in where the Russian emigres are, and taking care of people, and he does not wear any shoes. It was a similar thing. He was giving away his shoes.
Reminds me of Mary Pettigrew.
Tell
She
me.
just left church all over the place.
Oh, I don't. Yeah, maybe.
No, when they went to, another mission trip, I can't remember where it was. It was an island. And it was a group of teenagers and a very, very poor country. And they brought shoes for them. So they gave away the shoes and they had a wonderful time. And then they're leaving and there's a fence dividing where the people are that live there from the people that are going to get on the plane.
Yeah.
And as they're walking around the fence, she sees one person that didn't get any shoes. So she took her shoes off and threw them over the fence to this kid. So everybody in the group took their shoes off.
Oh my goodness, that's marvelous.
You know, it's just that little, I think sometimes we have those impulses to do those things, but in our double-mindedness, in our cautiousness, in our fearfulness, we overthink it. And then the moments pass and the opportunities go. Instead of that childlike spontaneity. She didn't think about getting on that, walking across the hot tarmac in bare feet. She just threw her shoes up. So it's very difficult though in our culture because of about the, well, I didn't read the rest of the chapter, so I shouldn't say altruistic.
Okay,
Father,
John.
I'm gonna, go further with what Yvonne said. The patriarch of Alexander did not want to give Notarius the job because he was afraid that he would give away everything.
Right.
And for that is why they started persecuting him. So it's actually a total reverse. And so it's just phenomenal, and these guys just wouldn't quit.
Yes,
So I think the point with Victorios and all these examples, we're talking about it being selfless. It's not that they're selfless in themselves, they're not altruistic. It's when they come to encounter God, their love for God, they start to give that love out.
very good. This is
That's the conclusion that I got out of this movie, that he's so Christ-like, and I'm not. He's just exactly the copy of Christ. It just doesn't come, this behavior just comes from a person that's completely filled with Christ. He's no more nectarian, he's Jesus.
That's right,
How did he get?
yeah.
Well, all through you, he was doing the time.
Through much tribulation, Christina,
Lord have mercy on me.
through much tribulation, you saw the suffering that was depicted.
I didn't see one.
Okay, the Sophrony of Essex, echoing his spiritual father Silouan, says that when we love as Christ loves, when we have that love abiding us, our heart begins to broaden. It says that he quotes the Psalm. David says, "Thou hast brought my heart into a broad place." It's an incredible verse. I didn't know that meaning until reading Silouan. He expresses it like that. So the breadth of our heart is a hidden place, but it's also a profoundly deep place. And when the heart expands and gets bigger and bigger, pretty soon it envelops you. And then you, and then you, and then you are me. So that's how Silouan expressed that experience. And here's a man who prayed earnestly through World War II. Prayers like his saved the world from destruction. They enveloped all of mankind in their cry to God. That's not their love. That's your point, Dolly, is they became Christ, right? Another Christ. That to me just expresses the charismatic nature of the love of God and how true, authentic, evangelical love really is.
And Christina was saying how, I think this book explains how, I think the asceticism that he talks about is how we will just be able to uproot this sinful nature and be
Okay.
filled with God instead.
Now you're striking at the very heart of Archbishop of Berkeley's burden in this whole book. And that's to show how Christian ascesis is the effort that we're paying in order to remove the obstacles that stand in the way of this gift of love that God gives us and through us to our neighbor. We're removing obstacles.
Like taking the roof,
Yes, like taking the roof off.
bringing the garlic down.
Gregory Palamas, by the way, himself preached this on the day that we commemorate him, but when he preached on this homily, his homily on that gospel passage, he says he says the roof is all of the stuff that's covering our soul, all the passions, all of the turbulence, and when we clear all that rubble out of the way, the light of God's grace and his love shines down into the depths of our soul. It's incredible
Father
exposition.
Elias read it, by the way.
Pardon?
Other lies,
Just read it.
He did. He read it from there.
Read it from.
I didn't know that because I preached it where I was too, so I'm really glad to hear he did that. That's marvelous.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to say that if I had.
That's marvelous.
He said at the beginning, I hope these men knew the owner of the house.
Oh, yeah.
And then he went into it.
God bless him. That's marvelous. We have a good Father Elias is a wonderful.
And then he explained how they built those, cause he used to live there.
Yes,
So you could see how
Beams,
you
yeah.
could take it apart,
right,
but it would do damage to.
right. But the last time I was in the Middle East, the roofs of houses had this rebar sticking up with nothing over it. It's like, what, did they build it like that because someday they might add more on?
Exactly.
Here, it would never pass inspection. There's no inspection.
At all.
That's because they have a lot more probably no more
No,
back.
backsheish everywhere, unfortunately.
Okay, let's know that word, because we've been.
It's universal, the Turks invented it. Yeah. Okay,
So
so.
that's what it looks like right there,
What?
the love you're talking about.
That's right.
Christ on the cross.
This is crucified love. It's the only true, authentic love there is. Everything else is fake. So with that, can we go to the next half? All right. So I just entitled this second half of the chapter, which goes from page 36 to 47. It's a much more lengthy section of the chapter 3. I just call it fake love, the expose of fake love. That which claims to be love, but really isn't love. So the gospel's teaching on love gets supplanted by altruism, philanthropy, moralism, irreligious ethics, being Christian without Christ, doing good for goodness sake, right? Like that song, that Santa Claus song, better be, Santa Claus is coming to town, better be good, but be good for goodness sake, right?
Oh, you better not.
That's right. So the Archbishop avers these non-believers often charge Christians with selfishness for their love to gain eternal rewards. Right, so he's going to flesh out many things. So let's take the inventory of the things that he mentions in this second half of the chapter. Okay? So the first one, fake love, is the profession, I love for goodness sake. Right? The person that professes this is a certain kind of person who's autonomous. He mentioned that word. Do you know what this word means? Autonomous.
Self-ruling or?
Yes. Self-ruling. I'm an island unto myself, and if I deign to love you, it's coming down from the heights of my egocentric citadel down to poor low you. Here, have a piece of bread. Yes. Now you may bow to me. Yes.
I can't see, we can't see that, do you have another color?
Oh, of course. But I'm not going to go to the trouble of writing it again.
Just tell me what.
I love for goodness sake. Because I'm autonomous. And I don't need anything, I'm a big boy, and I don't need religion as a crutch to help me do anything. Religion is for the superstitious, immature stage of human development where they needed some reward to kind of prompt them, but I'm above that. Okay? So, page 37, but a true Christian who accepts the whole doctrine of the gospel as his all-encompassing worldview does not love in order to gain rewards. The person who says this is only showing their complete ignorance or their complete lack of experience of divine grace. If they had any experience of that grace at all, they would never say such. Right? Averki shows the profound character of Christian teaching, charging religious people with not living it is no argument against Christianity. It is only a sign of their faithlessness to that teaching. This is called Phariseeism. Phariseeism. Okay? Now the Pharisees were the chief offenders because they were the most Orthodox Jews, and they believed in Moses, and they had the 5 books of Moses, and they believed the prophets, and they believed in the resurrection. So they had the most kind of, all the check marks, all good. And Jesus condemned them like no other group. You vipers, you hypocrites. This is all out of the mouth of the God-man himself.
Sons of the devil.
We read it in Holy Week. At the, come to the liturgy of the Free Sanctified on Holy, I believe, Holy Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday. You'll hear that whole gospel. It's actually stunning. It makes me shiver every time I read it. It strips away right down to the core all the fake love, all the religious, icky, sticky, self-righteous, pious, platitudinous love that we profess to have, right down to the core. And Orthodoxy is relentless in trying to expose that and cure us of it, like almost going to a burn unit where they strip off the scabs and they keep doing it until there's no more left. In order that we might be cleansed thoroughly from it, because Phariseeism is married to ego, and that's who's in charge there. All right? The me, the I that's behind Phariseeism is the disgusting center of it. You can look at Matthew chapter 23 if you're taking notes and read that chapter and see how Jesus exposes it right down to its various elements. You tithe down to the very spices, the mint and cumin in your cabinet. You tithe perfectly. But you neglect the weightier matters of the law, of mercy, and truth, and judgment. Those are all expressions of love, right? We just read from the prophecy of Isaiah in the Lenten readings. I looked for righteousness, but behold, I heard only a cry of oppression. Right? So, religious professionalism, if you will. I'm really good at going to church. I'm really good at keeping all the rules and regs. I know the liturgy. I know all this and that. But without love, darn Christianity. Right? Okay. So I told you that at the beginning, on page 36, he said that the non-believers often charge the Christians with selfishness for their love, expressing their love or doing their loving deeds or their good deeds in order to gain eternal rewards, right? Page 39 and 40 has more to say about rewards and punishments. I especially want to draw your attention. I'm going to open the book and read it to you, to page 40 at the top. So I'm going to write down here rewards and punishments as a motivation, and it's the problems with it. I'm sorry, I'm not a very good writer. My students, when I was a high school teacher, they used to constantly lambaste my writing on the blackboard. Herr O'Grady, we can't read what you're writing, so therefore that's why I didn't do my homework. Nowhere are these rewards and punishments offered as the main exclusive motivation for the Christian. Nowhere. In fact, these rewards and punishments are not the motivation, but the natural end result of one's lifestyle. Christ explains that the narrow and sorrowful path of life preached by him has its natural end, eternal joy, while the broad and easy path counter to the gospel culminates in eternal grief, eternal torment. These are consequences, not imposed from without in an artificial way by God, right? These are not incentives. I don't know about you, but you could scare me to death about hellfire and never would do a thing. When I was a teenager and people said, you're going to go to hell if you don't accept Jesus, I would just go, is there going to be a party there? I mean, do they serve beer there? You know, I was a stupid kid. Okay, don't get me wrong. But that was no motivation for me. These are not incentives, and they're not external pedagogical methods to force a person to act in a certain way. They are the natural results of a chosen lifestyle which he warns against and makes abundantly clear. And this is what I underlined in red ink. It is long overdue for us to reject that absurd and even blasphemous notion that floated over to us from Catholicism, that God rewards us for good deeds and punishes us for evil ones.
Yeah, that's Catholic.
I was scared to death as a kid. Jesus was up there scowling, you know. And I know a lot of people, I've talked to a lot of people over the years, and a lot of people that don't go to church anymore left because that's what they thought God was like.
That's what my parents thought.
You and like 50 billion other parents. God does not do that. That's not God. When Moses said, show me your glory, do you know what God said? I'll read it to you. Worth reading it to you. And Moses said, show me thy glory. Oh, this is such a small print. Here it is. I found it. My eye went right to it. The Lord passed by in front of him and before him and proclaimed the name of the Lord. The Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in mercy and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, etc. That is the true and living God. All the rest are fakes and demons or imposters.
What verse?
Oh, now I know.
Google it.
Do you think I can find it that quickly again? I believe it's Exodus 32, but don't hold me to it. The early 30s. There. You can now, instead of Googling a thing tonight, you can spend your time with your Holy Bible. So, there was once an essay written by an Orthodox dentist, actually. Got a blank in his name.
River of Fire?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
You love it.
Calvados?
Yeah, something like that.
He wrote a beautiful essay called The River of Fire. He preached it, he gave this paper at an Orthodox conference in Seattle, Washington, about 40 years ago. I've used this in a lot of times with converts, people who come to the church. Every single one I've given it to, every single one finds it to be an astounding new way to look at who God is. He basically said, is God really good? And is there a hell? It's an astounding expose, and you can get it online. You don't have to pay a penny for it. Just look it up online. Is God really good? Once you've settled that question, the second question answers itself. And it means there's a key for interpreting the Bible. How do we understand the Bible? If If you read the Bible literally, you'll never get anywhere. You have to read the Bible according to the spiritual sense that the church teaches us. That's why people who just read the Bible alone, they're kind of kooky. Because they don't have any guide. They don't really know what they're reading. And they come up with all kinds of weird stuff. Yes, Sophie.
Alexander Calamiros.
There it is, Alexander Calamiros, the River of Fire. K-A-L-I-M-I-R-O-S, Calamiros. Okay, you can look that up and read it for yourself. Do yourself a favor, that would be a wonderful reading if you're not familiar with it.
Well, the one thing that impacted me from that is that the word for justice in Hebrew is more closely associated with mercy.
That's right.
And he talked about Joseph being a just man, sought to put away Mary privately. He didn't want to embarrass her. He
Exactly.
had mercy on her.
Right,
He was a
not
just
just
man.
cold balance scale.
Right.
Yeah, that's pagan idea of justice. Fairness, you say. That's not fair.
Hasn't Western Christianity kind of conflated the devil with God? I
In
mean,
a way, it's not
God is
overtly, but yes, in a way, it's allowed to come into the tent, kind of the head of the camel, and brought with it this train behind it, this toxic idea that God is looking for, a place for that thunderbolt to rest and right in between the plates and the armor. Okay, let me make sure that we've got these things listed down here. So most people, so rewards and punishments, not motives, but consequences. The only motive of Christian morality is love.
Say that again, you were begging.
The only motive for Christian morality is love. Without love, there is no other motive to do anything. That's the whole point. And that means that motive is grace-bearing. It's illumined and fired by God himself. And we have the love of God poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit. Right? Romans 8. It's not a moral thing. It's a charismatic thing. It's a gift. We love him. Why? Because he first loved us. I see his love. I'm astounded. I melt. And then my natural response is to love him back. So I begin to talk to him. I begin to pray. And then I begin to talk to my neighbor and treat him like another Christ, because I see Christ in my neighbor naturally. I don't have to work hard at that. It's a natural, charismatic response of the divine love. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, most people are not completely non-religious. Even if the religious feelings are suppressed, they're still active. That's what he says. I think this is a beautiful expression. I think we should really take this to heart. Most people we talk to do have an inkling within them. They do have a kind of a residual, they've gotten something from somewhere. And the idea for us is to appeal to that and to call it forth. Jesus said, a smoking wick he will not extinguish, and a bruised reed he will not break. So God is always looking to encourage the flaming up of divine love within a person. So that means we have to have, we as his ambassadors, if we're sensitive, we can sense that in a person and then evoke that, call it forth. That means we have to be good listeners. Love for us must really require both humility and silence. We have to learn how to listen to our neighbor so we can actually become aware of his or her presence. If I'm doing all the babbling, I'm not looking at you, I'm just projecting my own ego. But if I stop and I listen to you, then something begins to happen. It's almost magical, isn't it? Job's friends loved him. They came and sat by Job for 7 days and 7 nights and didn't say a word. Read the book of Job, it's fascinating. You can fly by that verse without thinking about it.
And then they had to open their mouth.
Then and the Bible is cool about how it says that. And then so-and-so opened his mouth and said, I love that expression. Okay, now we have to go down to this next one. Another fake love is social charity. This is fake love. And I think since this is something we all meet with every day, as Archbishop of Berkeley points out in his time in the 1950s, it sounds like today, he says, this is the fashion of our times, social charity, this pseudo-love. I love the whole world, give bread to all the poor, universal income for everyone. Everyone should have a place.
World peace.
World peace.
World
But then when it comes down to the actual personal engagement of love, these people fail miserably.
Give me a house.
I love the whole world, but just keep me away from my neighbor.
Dirty and wash people away from me.
Then you get the NIMBY effect, right?
The what?
NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Oh.
This is contemporary, cold, soulless, even mercenary. Those are all his words. People accepting social benefits are often experience them from it a kind of moral degradation. I remember a generation or two ago when I was younger that a self-respecting person who was in trouble only with difficulty would accept charity because they felt it was demeaning for them to accept it, and it was something like, please don't tell anybody, like this is shameful for me to accept a handout. Now people just, put it out there like they deserve it. Love of God inspires moral excellence. We want to be like Him. So social charity does not have an inspiration behind it. It's cold and soulless. I'm going to tell you an experience I have had frequently, and I truly mean this not as what I'm about to say. I mean this not as a kind of a prompt for you to say something in response. I'm truly making a confession. Oftentimes when I'm out and about and somebody's asking for something and I give it to them, their response leaves me with a kind of sickly feeling. I don't feel happy about it. I'm just telling you my experience. And I feel that I've participated in a kind of exchange that made them worse. Have any of you else had this?
Yes.
I'm just confessing the feeling I have.
That's where I live.
Christina?
Can I share an experience?
Yes, please.
When I was younger, much younger, I was a college student and I was in social work was my goal. So, sociology with the end toward becoming.
Yeah, the LBJ Great Society deal.
Well, back then it wasn't that. I participated in the national program. It was an experimental program to see how best to set up welfare programs in rural areas. So I was in Iowa, and I went out, I was given a list of people that were at poverty level or below. And I went out and I interviewed them, and we set them up on this program where they would receive money from the government, free money, for a period of 6 months. So when I'd go out periodically and find out how they were spending the money, how was it improving their lives, just various questions like that. And then at the end of the 6 months, we said, thank you for participating, and they didn't get any more money from us. When I started with these people, they were happy, they were content, they were family people, they were living on farms, they didn't have a second TV, their car was not the best, but it was running.
Wow.
You know, they were getting by. And they were happy and they were relatively content. At the end of the program, when we cut that off, they had developed a sense of entitlement that made them miserable. So we took perfectly happy people and made them unhappy by giving them money and showing them a higher standard of living. They didn't spend it on anything they really needed.
Right.
You know, it was extra money, and so they bought a microwave, or they bought, you know, the extra things in life. But my point is, you don't help people that way. You don't help people that way. Now, if I had gone in and developed a relationship with these people and saw some actual needs that they had, like, you know, you could sure use a new, you've got 5 kids and your washing machine isn't working. Let me give you a washing machine. That would have been a much better way to help them. But this autonomous giving of cash is so demeaning and so impersonal.
Okay,
And
that's
it
a
even
very
builds
good
in
testimony.
resentment on the part of people that are being taken from, because there's no actual generosity.
No,
If your
it
taxes
didn't
are
have
taken from you, you're not being generous.
Yeah, it didn't have anything to do with generosity. It's just a way to level out the culture, because we do feel guilty, you know? We do. I feel guilty. I live in so much comfort, and I do feel guilty about that. But just like anything else, you know, our giving has to be in response to our love for the Lord and obedience, you know?
Right.
I can't just go out and sell everything because I feel guilty. You know, I can pray about it, you know, and maybe have some doors open for me, but it's really a sticky wicket if you start responding to that guilt that's
Right.
imposed on you, usually from the devil. So, anyway, I just wanted to share that, because I
Very
learned a
good.
big lesson from that.
That's a very good.
I changed my nature.
Father, can I ask a question?
Yes,
In light of Lent, and
Yes.
we're supposed to fast and then give alms as part of that.
that's right.
How do we do that in a way that's not social charity or social gospel?
Well, okay, so charity becomes toxic when it's human-based, when it's ego-based. It becomes poisonous, and we impart that ego-driven thing to the other person. And they feel that. They feel the stickiness of it, the beholdenness of it. It's not liberating, right? So I, frankly, I'm in favor of not giving cash, but in giving in kind when you have exactly the situation you can see to do it. Or giving in cash to organizations who know how best to do that, that have a good reputation. They have a good reputation for getting benevolence to people who desperately need it, where they need it. That fulfills Isaiah's prophecy about what is the fast that's accepted by God, right? Isn't it to share your bread with the hungry, right? Well, who are the hungry? Is it this 20-year-old out here that could be working, is just a bum? Excuse me, he's a bum. Like, get up and go to work. Paul says, if a man does not work, he should not eat. Who's ever quoting Paul? We don't ever hear him quoted. It's like everybody deserves a basic income. Like, give me a break. That's demeaning. A man needs to learn the value of hard work and breaking a sweat and bringing home the bacon for his family. But then when you have a woman who is clearly abandoned by her man, who used her up and threw her away and left her with a baby, our hearts go out to these people. And then we want to do anything we can for them. I'm giving you some textbook cases to show you our Christian ethos here. we don't have enough confidence in our vision of what human beings are to be able to tell the difference in today's society. We kind of almost don't care. It's like, don't give me the details, like, where do I put the money? Can I just put it there and you can take it from me? I don't know if I want to touch your stuff because there might be, crabs or something. I hope you understand there's a difference between toxic, ego-driven charity and divine charity, which sees the other person as an extension of Christ. That's why Jesus said, when did he ever see you hungry or thirsty? And he says, insofar as you've done this for the least of my brethren, you've done it for me. There's a big difference in that. We have to know how to tell the difference. I don't think we know how to tell the difference. So he says, love is the hallmark of Christian discipleship. And the early martyrs, the early pagans said, those Christians, we can tell them because they love each other. They demonstrate love. And the agape feasts of the early Christians were interpreted by the early pagans as amorous parties, where they got together and, they brought their own filthy idea to what they thought was going on in the Christian assembly after the doors were locked. That's part of early Christianity. So they were well known for their love, but the unclean people thought it was an unclean love. So the world lacks this true love, he says on pages 46 and 47, and he ends, I put it in red, quote, only the gospel of Christ offers a love powerful enough to rejuvenate our perishing world.
Say it again.
Page 47. Only the gospel of Christ offers a love powerful enough to rejuvenate our perishing world. I went out on a limb on some things. I hope you understand the complex situation we find ourselves. Our society is in an advanced state of Christian apostasy. This is not a Christian society. Anybody who thinks it is got their head in the sand. This is an apostate culture.
They've stopped even pretending. 20 years ago, they were pretending.
Yeah, when I was young, in the 1950s, you could use that term Christian in a kind of a loosey, moral way, I guess. But he wrote this book in the 1950s when I was a little kid. And the way he's speaking, it sounds like it's today. Right? Okay,
I
yes.
just want to say one more thing. Sometimes I hear people talk about, end times and getting set up for the Antichrist, and that's a possibility, pretty far advanced. But I think it's really important for us to realize it's not cast in stone. It's not cast in stone. And we, as the true believers, the living church of God, have the ability to turn everything around. If we embrace the love of God and we give ourselves to prayer, we can really make a difference.
Right.
So
That's
I
true.
don't think you're gonna make a difference by circulating petitions.
No, of course not.
But I think we can make a difference if we learn to pray.
If we pray
out
and
of
if we're
love.
obedient to the Spirit that prayer opens up in us, right, the follow through. Prayer is like the golf swing that hits the ball, but then there's that follow through. And that's the good works.
So,
How do you like that? Sounds like you really know what I'm talking about.
I've seen you golf here.
Yeah. Worm burners, baby. Worm burners.
And then the anger that
Oh.
follows.
All my golf clubs have like curly keys to them. No, I only, that was just a youthful attempt. I've done many things in life, but not for very long, each one. Okay, any other comments to wrap up this incredibly inspiring chapter and setting us up for next week where he then follows it up with acquiring gospel love. So he goes more on this theme. Before we get into the finer points of ascesis, we're dealing with the most important aspect at first. So we'll follow up next week with chapter 4, which is acquiring gospel love. He told us what it is and what it isn't. But then the next chapter is then, how do we get this? I mean, aren't you all ready to sign up? I want the good kind. I don't want the fake X. I don't want any of this stuff. I want the gospel love. Right?
It kind of includes crucifixion.
And
Yes.
the last 2 pages, page 45 and 46, there, I think is already starting to take us there.
That's right.
They're just beautiful, these last 2 pages of the chapter.
Yes. And he says in the beginning of the next chapter that it's a continuation of the previous chapter.
Oh,
Yes, so you're right. He's clearly breaking up a long chapter into 2 halves. Yeah. We can keep that in mind, and then those of you who didn't do your homework, you have a chance now to go back and read, starting on page 33, going forward, so you really can grasp what he's doing on page 48, 9, or whatever, going on to page 60. Right? So let's take this one with a heavy, knowing that this is kind of the heart of the book right here, in a very real sense, and that everything else will kind of like be flowing out of it as a secondary thing. All right. We're going to conclude, but I want to announce that this week we have a great feast of the Mother of God, the Annunciation, which is a feast of the Mother of God and of the Lord, and that occurs on Friday the 25th. So 9 months of shopping days left before Christmas. All right. Anyway, the Annunciation, since it falls on a Lenten day, we wait until the evening to celebrate the liturgy. So if you're going to commune on the feast, like keep the fast on Friday, not past the noon hour at the very latest. And then fish feast after the liturgy on Friday evening, if you wish. That means we have 2 communions this week, the pre-sanctified tomorrow night, and then the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom on Friday night, okay? And then we'll come to the veneration of the cross on Sunday. All right, God bless you all. Let's say a prayer to conclude. Let us pray to the Lord.
Lord, have mercy.
Now let us thou thy servant depart in peace for my, let us now, according to thy word, for mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared before the face of all peoples, a light revelation to Gentiles and a glory of thy people Israel. It's funny, outside the service, I get that. Okay, Dr.
Thank you, Father.
Trying to do your lines out of context, I know it's like, doing your lines out of context. Just do that speech, I can't, because it comes at a certain time.
Exactly, I have to be set up for it.
Exactly. Very simple.
Like saying,
Very simple.